Millions of people are taking medication for depression, anxiety, and mood disorders right now. And millions of them are still suffering, not because they are trying, not because they are weak, but because the way we treat mental health is fundamentally broken. And most doctors are not telling you why. Today's guest is one of the physicians who is changing that. It's Dr. Doreen, and she is an amazing individual. She has spent her career asking a question that most psychiatrists are not trained to ask. What is happening in your body that is affecting your mind? Dr. Doreen is a board certified psychiatrist, addiction specialist, and chief medical officer at Fountain Health, a brand new prescription psychiatry clinic in New York City built on the radical idea that mental health is a biological condition and that treating it looking at your biology is like treating a bone with an X-ray, without an X-ray. At Fountain Health, Dr. Zarfati, it combines psychiatry, neurology, functional medicine, and biomarker informed care to find the root cause of why people are getting better and built a plan that actually works. Now, Dr. Doreen, welcome to the show. And I see that you have a special friend and he's also collaborates with you and he's one of the partners with you. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Zarfati. I've been practicing psychiatry for about 20 years, and I originally started working in emergency room and emergency psychiatry, seeing very difficult cases in crisis. And I was the assistant director at Kings County Hospital, and then I became the director at Woodhull and helped them develop a crisis integrative emergency medicine for psychiatry. I moved into private practice, doing that for about 13, 14 years. And about 5 years ago, I was thinking about, you know, the way my patients are being treated and like things that I was observing and the cadences in their behaviors and their illness and the symptoms and how dynamic it was. And then about 3 years ago I met Nikita and we started to collaborate and talk about, we came from two different perspectives which really helped integrate the approach. He came from experiences that he's had in real life, which he can talk about, and I came from the medical model and really started talking about the limitations that I was seeing, and together we built Fountain and really have developed this biological approach to psychiatry, which we've been practicing now for about 3 years. And it's been very, very impressive the changes that we've seen in our patients and new patients and the patients that I was already seeing and treating, and really taking this integrative approach, really kind of understanding what is going on, why are patients not getting better, why are they better and suddenly not better, and really looking at it from the perspective of their psychosocial. So, like, what is going on in their lives, and
Yeah.
then biologically, what's happening in their bodies, and then taking into account their history of what their experiences were like, and integrating that into the medical model of their medications, their medical history, and their psych history. And then every individual that we see has a very individualized approach. No two people are the same. We're kind of like fingerprints and the same thing in terms of care.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'll just introduce myself. So, Nikita Simmer, co-founder of Fountain Health. As I was mentioning to you a little bit earlier, I was coming into mental health from the outside. Mental health is something that always touched me personally, seeing a lot of my friends here growing up in New York City really struggle and cycle through the traditional mental health care model, which is very much focused on symptom and medication management. And my friends were sitting on a cocktail of different prescription medications, and over the years, none of them were getting better. It's something that stuck with me through all these years, and I refused to accept that the ceiling was this low. And I met Dr. Zarfati 3 years ago at this point. And so the combination of everything that I know on the business side, all of the ideas that we both had around creating this care model, but actually putting all of the systems into place to allow us to practice what we're calling modern psychiatry, really makes us a strong team.
Now, was it just your friends that made you so compassionate about getting involved in with Dr. Safadi, or was it also something that you went through personally yourself?
Yeah, I think I've always had a personal interest in mental health care. Always wanted to create something that would help a greater number of people. And so I think at some point in their lives, everybody does experience anxiety, rumination. And so I think creating something where we could support patients fully through it. And I like to say that our care begins from the moment somebody picks up the phone and calls us, and making sure that we're with the patient all the way through, not just during the appointments. That was really the basis for what we're building at Fountain Health.
I like that. Now, let's start with something that I think will surprise a lot of people. Most of us think of mental health as something that lives in our thoughts, our emotions, our experiences, but you believe that it's something else entirely. Now, what is that, Dr. Safadi?
So what you're describing is the experience, right? That people are feeling. What we're looking at is understanding that mental health is biological. Our brain is an organ. It's one of the largest organs. I've been saying this to patients for a very long time. It controls all your other systems. So we can't take a look at it in isolation. So we treat psychiatry as an organ system disorder. And the framework that we use is more of looking at plasticity, inflammation, and not just a deficiency of serotonin or a neurotransmitter issue, which is still also relevant, but it's very oversimplified and
Yeah.
rudimentary. So we take a look at all of that. I think psychiatrists in general, are trained in a medical model, and a lot of it is 15-minute checks about 3 times, like every 3 months. You're not really understanding what the patient is going through. You're basically treating symptoms with medications, and you're missing a lot of what else could be happening underneath. We really take the time to, everyone who comes in gets a biological panel to really understand what's happening with your hormones, what's happening with your thyroid, what's happening with your metabolism, what is happening with your inflammatory markers. And we get very, very specific. So also not just in psychiatry for psychiatrists, but also the PCP, the primary cares, are taking labs routinely, but they're very rudimentary. And even though they may be taking a thyroid panel, they're missing some very, very specific labs in that thyroid panel that will really help us understand, like, is there another underlying cause? Like, they may come out normal, but they're not actually normal. The same with inflammatory markers. And with hormones, we take a look at cortisol. We want to measure cortisol from the morning to the evening to really understand how our body responds to stress, which is very important.
Yeah.
And I just want to give kind of the high level 50,000 foot view. So, mental health care today is treating the mind and the body as two separate things, even in how a medical issue has always been looked at as mutually exclusive from a mental health issue. And so we always took a problem with that, right? The body is one interconnected system. Anxiety, depression, burnout, even emotional resilience,
Hmm.
all these things can be affected by your biology. And when we speak about the biology, we're looking at inflammation, hormones, metabolism, micronutrients. We're really trying to get a full picture on it. And I think, we recognize that it is biological, but there are also several other things as well. It could be psychological, it could be lifestyle, it could be environmental. So the care model that we built around that really uses the biology as the foundation. And from there, we're building care plans that are highly individualized to a specific patient.
I love that. Why does treating mental health without looking at the biology miss so much of the picture?
Okay. Well, I mean, this is a really good question because what you see is that people come to you, but like their internal framework, it's dynamic, it changes. So we get feedback from the world and it really integrates into how we process it biologically and psychologically. You can't separate them because there's constant messages between them. I mean, we all know this, neuroscientists know this. And if you're not looking at the biology, you're missing things that are like problems that are biological that could look like mental health issues. You have patients who already have a baseline of a diagnosis of, depression or anxiety. And they often say, I'm not feeling well, or I'm tired, or I have brain fog. And, I don't know what's going on with me. And no one's looking at their biological picture. So they're not progressing or getting better. And I've seen this so many times of patients who come to me. There are women who come to me in their like late 30s, early into 50s, and they're being treated with SSRIs or some variation of that, and they're still not feeling very well. And it's very discouraging for them because they're like, I'm trying to do all of the things. I'm going to therapy. I'm seeing a psychiatrist. I'm taking the medications. I'm trying to sleep. but I just don't feel well.
Yeah.
And when you start to think about these things and you do a panel, suddenly you see they're in perimenopause
Hmm.
or they have high inflammatory markers. And if your hormones are off, then you're going to have all of these symptoms mimicking or enhancing these psychiatric symptoms. And if you
Right.
don't treat them, an SSRI is not going to it's not going to cover that for them. And so
Right.
it creates an even worse negative feedback loop for them and they just feel very helpless and hopeless.
Definitely. And a lot of times people don't even know what's going on with their body. They just see these changes and they're clueless of what's going on. They just don't feel right. They know that they're changing. They see the changes, but they just don't know what to do.
But it's not just a psychiatry problem, it's also a medical problem.
Yes.
Because I do see patients who I'll give you an example. I have a few patients that I have seen for years, and I know something is wrong. Before we created this model, I used to send them to their primary care. I said, something is wrong with you. Like, we're not reaching our goals. Like, go get a medical workup. And they'd come back and it'd come out negative. And in the last 2, 3 years, as we've been developing this and really putting into practice, I do these thorough labs and I see that actually I was correct, right?
Hmm.
I have one patient, she is overweight, very overweight, and has tried lots of different medications for weight loss and, diets and all of these things. And she just cannot lose weight. And she's constantly tired, exhausted. And it's very, very difficult to feel good when you're tired and motivated and get to work and think about, how to concentrate. So we I thought she had PCOS. She went to her medical doctor. Her medical doctor ran the labs and said, I'm sorry, but you don't have PCOS. So I don't know what this is. And I said, this doesn't seem right to me. Let's do our panel, which is much more extensive. And she came up with insulin resistance, which is missed on a general panel because what they do is they check the glucose fasting and
Yep.
they check hemoglobin A1C, which is totally normal, but she has insulin resistance, and that's very classic for PCOS. And
Yes.
her cortisol levels were off, her hormones were off, and we started treatment with a GLP-2, which is a medication to help with weight loss, but it's a metabolic medication because PCOS is metabolic.
Hmm.
And it was very, very helpful. It reduced a lot of her symptoms. She was actually able to work out and feel motivated and had a lot less noise and more clarity and started to lose weight in a very systematic and helpful way. And we do a lot for that as well. So like we don't just prescribe the medications, we fit it into what do you do when you take these medications and how do we improve your outcomes and educate you so that you don't run into future issues or side effects. And we educate them. So she's one of many stories in which she felt extremely validated that, wow, something is wrong. Like I've been kind of pushing this boulder up a hill and not really getting anywhere. And everyone's telling me nothing is wrong with me. So that's just
Right.
one of many stories that we have.
And Dr. Zarfati just made a really good point where she was just discussing Fountain's approach to biomarkers or labs versus a primary care physician's. And I think it's important to bring up when a PCP is running your labs. I mean, first and foremost, they are very concerned about how to code for it, right? These are typically in network providers. And so that's why the depth of their panels is actually relatively shallow. And a PCP is really looking for one thing, disease. Are there any red flags that the body is giving off? Versus at Fountain, one of our advantages of being out of network is we're able to look at a much larger set of panels that have a lot of depth, but we don't just ask, is there any disease in the body? First and foremost, we're looking for, is there any dysfunction? We're also understanding how does the patient feel on a day-to-day basis? Because you can have a patient that has perfectly good labs, but they still have brain fog or fatigue. And we're also trying to understand how do all of the systems within the body communicate with one another and what can we do to actually optimize that. So it's a very different approach. And once again, we're looking at everything through the lens of mental health. So that's kind of what makes us different versus a typical PCD for labs.
Right. I love that. Now, here is something so many people have lived through. You go to the doctor, you get a diagnosis, you get a prescription, it doesn't work. Then you try another one that doesn't work either. Months go by, sometimes years. And why does this happen to so many people?
Are we talking about psychiatry or medicine or all of the above?
All of the above.
Okay. Well, I think that there's a few things. One is, you really do have to, aside from the lab work, you really have to do a good job in getting a history and understanding who this person is. You have a lot of patients who have multiple system disorders. It's not just one, and they may have several physicians. And so there's miscommunication or lack of communication between all of these clinicians. Patients are not geared to understand what's happening with them. They just kind of take instruction. So you're coming into the doctor without knowledge of medicine. It makes it very difficult to advocate for yourself.
Right.
Do is we want all of your clinicians' name. We want to understand how everyone is communicating or what your challenges are, what you don't understand. So we encourage people to ask a lot of questions to try and help them understand what kind of questions to also ask their clinicians. So that's something that's been really difficult for patients. And then again, if things are being missed on your labs, they're not thorough enough, then you're missing a very, very important step in medication or pathway to get better.
I love that. Now, what is wrong with the way mental health care has been practiced, and why has it taken this long to actually change?
I think something you said a little bit earlier when you were introducing us is that clinicians, doctors are being taught the same way they've always been taught. Yeah. It's very siloed. And, again, you also have regulations from insurance companies. So stepping out of that box can be very difficult and very expensive. And doctors don't know how to manage that. I think there's like a lack of people wanting to step out of the box and like question, is this correct? Is this not? There are clinicians who do that, but a vast majority don't. Either they don't have the time, they're inundated with so much work, and they just aren't that curious. Patients are coming in for 15 minutes. There's not much you could do in that time frame.
Mhm.
But really take a look at like basic labs and then treat a number, but not the person.
Yeah.
You have a lot of rotation and people are not getting better and not really understanding what they can do when they're not at the doctor's office. Because you're spending most of your time living your life. You're
Right.
not spending your 15 minutes with the doctor once every several months. So you don't know what to do in that time, but take
Right.
medication. But there's so many other things that you could do that are not medication related that could actually improve your medical and psychological health. And they're very, very basic. So no one's really teaching you, how do I get a good night's sleep, which is one of the core, most important things that you could do. It sounds so basic, but again, that's something that you hear a lot. And doctors hear this a lot. I can't sleep. I'm up. I'm not falling asleep. I'm waking up a lot. I wake up too early. They feel very tired. And they either get medication for it or it's just ignored.
Right.
I think
It's
we
one of
also,
the biggest problems that we have.
It is. It is. And you have to look at what is the core of this insomnia, of this problem.
and I was just going to say, we also realized going into it that mental health care today is very reactive, it's fragmented, and it's episodic. So you have patients that are coming in, they're getting a treatment done, or they're having some sort of session, and they might be seeing multiple different providers, whether it's a therapist, a psychiatrist, a PCP, and there's absolutely no communication between all of these sort of different providers.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, what we've heard from our patients is that they're getting different pieces of advice that actually conflict with one another
Oh, yeah.
because this connectivity between the providers doesn't exist. And so for us, it was important whenever we work with any provider, whether a mental health care provider, primary care physician, we really believe in this idea of co care and collaboration,
Mhm.
always putting together reporting that we're sending back to the provider to make sure that everybody is staying in the loop. And one of the other things that we realized too is that when a patient is coming in for treatment, they then step out into a gap, and that gap becomes a major blind spot for a provider.
Mhm.
Between those visits is where relapse can happen. The outcomes tend to plateau. So we really try to support those patients in between the visits.
Yeah.
Our long term goal is figuring out a way to make mental health care become much more continuous, similarly to how we can track glucose
Yeah.
and our heart rhythms continuously. We would like to develop something like that for mental health care to make sure that we can always be there to support the patient in between those sessions, not just while they're sitting in the chair or getting a treatment.
I think you made a good point before. You talked about, you go for treatment, but you see the doctor for X amount of time and then you go home. You really, it's not only just getting the treatment from the doctor, it's learn like you said, learn how to sleep properly, learning how to eat properly, because everything we put in our body plays a huge effect on how we feel, how we think, everything. Because if your body doesn't know what to do with it, it stores it. And if you store a lot of toxins in your body over time, it's going to affect every organ. It's going to affect your brain. It's going to affect everything, including clarity and being able to focus and so forth. And then just having some exercise in your diet, you don't have to be at the gym for 3, 4 hours. You could just be 15 minutes of easy exercise or walking, and that could play a big role in your body. There's so many things that we have to include. A lot of people in our society want a quick fix, and they think by just doing one treatment, that's going to be it. But it's overall, it's taking care of all aspects of your body.
I like the mention of the quick fix. Something I was really thinking about is there's another piece, also a lot of the younger patients, they're getting information from TikTok or Instagram, and it has some positive connotations. They're getting a lot more information they might not be aware of, but they don't really know how to utilize it. And so
Hmm.
a lot of patients also either taking the care into their own hands and thinking they really understand, or doing things that they hear about, but like not really understanding how it interacts with other systems
Yeah.
or how to use it properly. And they get very frustrated and defeated. And that also causes like a negative feedback loop of like, but I did this thing and it doesn't work.
Hmm.
So we say this thing actually is helpful, but you have to know how to integrate it and at what pace and like what to expect.
Exactly, exactly. Now, this is where I think people are going to lean hard because you look at the biomarkers, you look at hormones, inflammation, metabolism, as clues to what's happening in someone's mental health. What can a blood panel or a biomarker test reveal about someone's mood, anxiety, or depression that a psychiatric evaluation alone cannot?
Okay. Well, there's a lot of clinical evidence for correlations between certain labs that can lead to depression or show a higher correlation with depression. For example, vitamin D deficiency, high inflammatory markers. You can have other micronutrient deficiencies. Low testosterone has been linked to depression. Female hormones can also lead to depression and brain fog and other symptoms. You have iron deficiency, which can lead to a lot of fatigue, which also can look like depression. Yeah. So all of those things can lead someone to look like they have depression or depression that's treatment resistant. And you can only find that out if you're taking thorough lab tests.
Mhm. That's so true. Now, can you give us an example, of something, concrete that people would recognize in themselves?
Yeah. So I think fatigue is a very, very basic symptom that people are often challenged with. And again, I'm talking about biomarkers, but again, everything is multi system. So we're going to talk about biomarkers for fatigue, but it could also come from other places. So, for example, if you have significant iron deficiency, I see a lot of patients coming with deficiencies. I would say about 90% of patients that come in, even if they're young, we do find something on their labs. It doesn't mean that if we correct that one thing, suddenly they're going to feel better. Again, it's multi-system.
Mhm.
For example, I had a patient who came in, I've been seeing her for a really long time, and she was really struggling with fatigue, and she got diagnosed with narcolepsy and was given stimulants by her primary care for narcolepsy, which was helping her symptoms, but still there was something going on. She was having a difficult time like focusing and breathing and just like feeling constantly like she was dragging herself even with these stimulants. And we did our evaluation, our biological evaluation, and she came up positive for a few genetic variants for very, very low iron and also for very low folate and increased homocysteine, which gave us a lot of indication of what else could be going on with her and treating her. And she was very shocked. She went to back to her primary care, made a few changes. She got some B12 injections, which really made her feel much better because she wasn't processing folate and homocysteine correctly. And that was contributing to more of what was happening with her. And she was actually able to come off of these stimulants and feel better. I mean, this was only one small part of her clinical picture, but this was a starting point for her in finding out other questions that she could ask, what other pathways to look at, and not necessarily trusting that like one diagnosis comes from one test.
Right, right. Now, for the listeners, if you have ever felt like your mental health treatment was not working or something was being missed, this episode is for you. Follow the episode right now. We're having the conversations that give you real answers, not just more questions. Now, let's talk about something that is finally getting attention that it deserves. Hormones, inflammation, gut health, sleep. These are not separate from mental health, are they?
We feel that they integrate into mental health. They integrate into how we function and how we interact with the world. Before we started this, I had a real interest in aging and longevity, which is one of the things that we also think about and treat. And really the pathway. There's several spikes in depression and anxiety in a human's lifetime, mostly when you're younger, and also again it shows up when you're older. So there's a lot of correlations. The question is like, why is this happening? Right. And it is coming from the biology. When you have these deficits or changes, you suddenly aren't able to interact the way that you did. You don't feel like yourself. You're tired. You have brain fog. Waking up in the morning, getting out of bed is a challenge. Feeling motivated, having energy to work out, maybe something that you really enjoyed, or taking a walk, or even socializing becomes very difficult. And this to feelings of insufficiency, of loneliness, and feeling that you aren't the same person. If you take a look at the biology and you start to like treat this early on, then you can prevent some of these things, the onset of depression when you're older, of
Right,
anxiety, and really help people to like take like action and really understand like what can you do and what to look for. So
right,
this is kind of what we're trying to do is not only treat what we're seeing, but also educate practitioners and patients to prevent this from happening, to kind of be on top of it, get their regular lab tests. We do these ongoing. It's not just a one-time thing that just gives you one section in time, but how does this integrate into your age, your lifestyle, and your biological pathway?
right, right. Now, how does something like inflammation actually affect the way someone feels emotionally?
Well, we know that when cortisol spikes and you have a lot of stress and cortisol spikes, it affects all of your other biological systems. So your hormones get dysregulated, your sleep gets dysregulated, your mood gets dysregulated. And you can see this show up with high inflammatory markers on your labs. We check for CRP. It's a very, very accurate indication of if you have an inflammatory process happening. And when that's elevated, it causes disruption in all of those things.
Wow. Now, what are the most overlooked physical drivers of anxiety, depression, mood instability that most doctors are simply not checking?
What kinds of like symptoms are people missing?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think fatigue is one. We've talked about it a few times. And while it's very like fatigue can be a part of a lot of processes, but doctors sometimes overlook these things unless they're a part of several components. So if someone's saying they're tired, they'll do their basic labs and miss the inflammatory process.
Hmm.
You see a lot of patients, it could be very subtle at first. The patient's saying something's off with me. I don't really know what it is, but like
Yeah.
they're still functioning. So you start to see fluctuations in mood more often. You have
Hmm.
more bloating, more like weight changes. So if someone is putting on weight or having a difficult time losing weight, even though they're taking care of what they're eating,
Hmm.
that could be a sign of inflammation. We have a lot of monitors right now to really kind of check like HRV, to check like your heart rate.
Hmm.
And those are also biological markers that could tell us that there is an increase in cortisol. So if you have a higher heart rate, that could be an indication.
Right.
So we can find these things in from with very simple tactics and also with going a little bit deeper.
And I think, the most important thing here is we're not going to sit here and we don't want to make correlations, right? And say, well, if you fix the inflammation or you fix the hormones, then that's it. The depression or anxiety is going to go away. That's not
Right.
our intention. But we believe that there has to be a much greater and deeper clinical picture for us to understand to be able to treat these things. I mean, there are several variables that can lead one to have depression or having anxiety, but not having insight into the biology is a huge gap, which
Right.
mental health care had, and we're trying to close that gap today.
Now, let's address the topic that a lot of people have been really curious about, but may not have fully understood. Now, ketamine therapy has gone from something that most people had never heard of to something that is being discussed everywhere. Now, what is ketamine therapy actually doing in the brain in plain language that everyone can understand?
So, ketamine is a dissociative medication that's been around since the 1960s, and it was used for anesthesia. And been actually reviewed and studied for many, many years, and it is gaining more notoriety in the last few years and really kind of progressing more into like common conversations. But ketamine is used for treatment resistant depression, it's used for anxiety, it's an incredible tool for trauma, and it increases neuroplasticity when it's used correctly. So it helps you to regrow pathways that have been not in use from depression, from anxiety, and it's a biological change in your brain. So it utilizes different neurotransmitters and different receptors, 23 of them, to really give a more integrative assistance for these conditions.
Right. Now, who is it right for and who is it not right for?
So, I think that a lot of people can benefit from it. So again, when people come in, it's very important to get an understanding of your baseline and what your expectations are, um, and really understanding how ketamine can impact you. It's good for people with depression, for trauma, for anxiety, and it has several components. One is the experience that you have when you're under the influence of ketamine, and then one is what happens after. So the biological changes that happen after. It's a progression for improvement. And then also, it's not a quick fix. It's part of a greater picture.
Hmm.
Part of how do you integrate this into your life and what do you do in that time when you're feeling more of that empowerment and motivation and energy that you get from ketamine? How do you use that forward to then progress in terms of your psychological condition or your lifestyle? So, it's a stepping stone, really. It's not a quick fix or a magic pill, but
Right.
it's very, very useful. It's one of the best treatments I've seen in my practice and the people that come through and take it. It's been very, very transformative and allowing people to look at perspectives very differently. So we do an evaluation to really kind of understand like who are you? What's happened to you? What are the challenges that you've had? What are your symptoms? What are you looking to do? And like really understanding like how curious are you about this? How open-minded are you? Can you let go of some of your preconceived notions? Like,
Yeah.
are you curious to really kind of understand like how that's going to impact you during treatment and after treatment? And people really come to us, at the end of all of these other treatments, they feel like they're helpless or hopeless. And I really wish there would be more education for people to understand that this doesn't have to be a last resort. And if you do this earlier, you may get to a better place sooner. It's not a given. It is a very, very good tool.
I love that. Now, what do people need to know before they consider it?
Do you want to take this one? I don't
There you
mind.
go.
Okay. So they have to understand that when you come in, you can't have expectations that this is going to be the thing that changes everything for you, that suddenly this is going to give you everything that you've hoped for. People have to come in with symptoms. It's not meant for necessarily burnout. It's meant for people who have real disorders and have had real challenges
Yeah.
and have had depression that doesn't clear, that have trauma. They've tried many different medications and nothing is really working. They've tried different types of therapy and they're feeling very stuck. The word that I hear often is I feel very stuck.
Hmm.
I'm trying all of these things. I do everything I'm supposed to. I take the medications. I see my therapist. I try to get sleep. I try to eat well, but like nothing. I feel like I've progressed a little, but now I'm just stuck and I'm still having these loops of thoughts and I'm still feeling like I'm ruminating and I can't break out of it.
Yeah.
that is what ketamine is really helpful for, is breaking that cycle and breaking that feeling of being stuck. It helps you be more flexible
Hmm.
in perception and your ability to understand a problem or to understand your relationship with someone.
Hmm.
And the thing that's really, really cool about ketamine, unlike a lot of the other medications, has
Right.
very minimal side effects. You still feel like yourself. So what I tell people a lot is because they have a lot of fear. How will this change me? How
Right.
will this change my dynamics with my family? There's a lot of fear around it. But what I say is everything actually stays the same. Your value system stays the same. You're the same person. If you don't like something, you're still not going to like it. If you have difficulty in some of your relationships, it's not necessarily going to change your feeling for the person, but it's going to change your perspective and your ability to communicate.
Right.
Gives this kind of emotional airbag is what a lot of my patients say. And so it gives you a moment to pause and interact differently. And
Yeah.
that changes the whole dynamic internally and externally. So it's the same person, but suddenly you're able to function a lot better.
Right. Now, Nikita, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think also the way that ketamine has been marketed to the public today through what I've seen on social media or how other providers talk about it is that it's this silver bullet, that it's going to cure your depression or make your anxiety go away. And I think for us, we want it to be very grounded in the medicine and the science behind it. So we're very transparent with our patients that there's still going to be a long road ahead. I think most operators today are treating ketamine as a drug delivery event versus for us, it's a whole body intervention. So once again, the biology plays a huge role into treatment, and we
Mm-hmm.
make sure that our patients that they have the biological foundation to develop any of this neuroplasticity. And last thing is that after the ketamine treatment, there's still going to be a lot of work that you have to do, whether it's with our team or your outside mental health care providers, to be able to integrate all of these things and to be able to actually shake some of those behaviors or negative thought patterns. Because what ketamine is able to do is loosen a lot of those rigid behaviors that a person has had.
And also the way that they associate with their trauma. So, I've seen a good amount of patients. Some were mine from my original practice, and some have come through to Fountain from other clinicians or referrals. And they are patients that have been on so many medications, constant trials, constant ineffective medications, and they really call their psychiatrist like like they need their doctor to like constantly change the prescriptions. They're constantly in crisis. They're having a very difficult time functioning. I have a few patients in my practice that every 2 days they would get in touch. They need an emergency session. And this was going on for a few years. And after ketamine, suddenly I don't really hear from them until their appointment at the end of the month. And at first I was worried, like maybe something was happening because they're very, very, have a lot of different,
Yeah.
they're actually doing better. They're not really depending on me as much anymore because they're able to integrate into their lives a lot better. So it's been really helpful for the trauma patients. The other thing about ketamine that Nikita was mentioning that we find to make ketamine very successful for us is that we do look at the foundation. It's very important before you even start ketamine to understand like what's your baseline. So if someone is having all of these hormonal issues or deficiencies, they could benefit from ketamine, but their neuroplasticity and their long-term benefit might not be as strong because their body is trying to combat all of these deficiencies or hormonal imbalance or stress. And so it can't muster up enough energy to create enough neuroplasticity.
Right.
So we do all of that and we integrate it into our care. And so we've had a lot of success with our ketamine program. We also do it very differently, the way that we approach it
Hmm.
from start to finish and the way that we dose it is very, very different. So we have over 90% improvement so 90% of the patients improve between 40 to 50%. And again, it's not just the ketamine, it's the foundation and
Right.
then so the integration afterwards, which is probably why it's more successful than the average ketamine statistics.
I love that. Now, this one actually is deeply personal for so many listeners. There are people who have done everything right, when it comes to therapy, medication, lifestyle changes, and they still struggle. Now, from a biological standpoint, what has actually happened with those people?
I think it's a combination of things. Think sometimes when you do too many things, you might be overwhelming your body. Again, like when people do things like work out, you can add stress to your body and you might feel tired. So it's really trying to understand the balance of all of these things. And again, we look at it in a very medical model. We take the baseline. We want to understand, like, what are you up against? We try to understand, like, how do you do these things? Maybe you're missing something.
Yeah,
Maybe you're not sleeping well. If you're not sleeping well and you're working out, you're exhausting yourself.
right,
All your cortisol will spike, your inflammation will spike. So while you think you're doing all of the right things, they might not be coming together in the right way.
right. Now, what does a more personalized biology first approach find that traditional care keeps missing?
Well, again, we take a look at everything and the balance of everything. And so no one process is like the gold standard. So, the individualized approach is that when you take lab work, you see that everyone has different, it's like a fingerprint. So some might have high inflammation and some might have a micronutrient deficiency and some might have hormonal problems, someone might have metabolic problems.
Right.
So everyone is different, but then also everyone has a different background. What was their life like? How did they grow up? What kind of medical conditions have they been battling? What kind of allergies do they have?
Right.
What's their day-to-day life? Like, how do they interact? Like, who is in their close circle? Do they feel lonely? Do they have like a good support system? How do they feel about their jobs? How many hours do they work? All of these things. Everyone is so different. Also, how you perceive and take on information is very different.
Yes.
No two people see the same circumstance the same way. And so
Exactly.
we take all of that into account in terms of how we approach the patient. What is the patient looking for? What do we find? And then
Hmm.
how do we educate them and teach them what to do or what we're going to do with them?
Right. Now, most people see a psychiatrist or a therapist once every few weeks, sometimes once a month, and a lot can happen in between those appointments. Now, why does, that model fall short for so many people?
I think you could talk a little bit about the continuity of care.
Yeah, sure. It's what we had been speaking about before, where mental health care today it's really episodic by nature. A lot of the times, a patient is showing up, whether it's for a session or a specific type of treatment. And during those sessions, the patient can be very insightful and they can really understand their patterns. But when they step out into the world, they really step out into a gap where the provider is no longer with them.
Hmm.
Usually, there can be some sort of event which can lead to an emotional
Right.
trigger a relapse. And a lot of the times within that gap, that's where we see the outcomes plateau.
Hmm.
So, to my example before, we have all of this technology today that can track different parts of your biology, whether it's your glucose or your heart rate. We really believe that providers should be with their patients in between all of those visits.
Right.
And that's why we're developing infrastructure today to actually be able to achieve that. But, maybe there's something else that you'd like to add to that on what happens in between the sessions.
I think patients have a very difficult time, you know, when they're in the session or they're meeting with clinicians, they get this burst of motivation. It's like they hear what's being talked about, but
Yeah.
then they have a very hard time integrating it and also really understanding like how some of their behaviors, like even those micro behaviors, may be contributing to some of these core issues that they keep coming up with. And if you don't have something in between, then you may miss, like, changes in, like, how they patients take their medications, even, like, subtle ways or, you know, like, small behaviors that can increase their symptoms that are very light. So, when you have continuous care, you can pick up on these things and make adjustments much faster.
Yeah.
When you see people once every 3 months or once every 6 months, that's a very, very big gap.
Yeah.
And also, you can't track their lab tests in that amount of time. So things are changing both biologically, psychologically, and dynamically.
Yeah.
It's not being captured.
Right. I agree. 100%. Now, what does it look like when mental health care is continuous, like when someone is actually being monitored and supported in real time?
You have patients who are feeling more motivated, who are feeling more heard, who feel like they're making progress. And the progress is not always in a positive direction. You have to process also the things that are happening that are difficult or problematic in order to make steps forward. So when
Right.
you have continuous care, you can process all of these things and kind of put all of the pieces together and kind of understand patterns because patterns are very, very important. And
Yeah.
in order to assess a pattern, you need to have more frequent interaction.
Right.
Dr. Zarfati touched on this point earlier, is that a lot of the times when there is some sort of crisis or a relapse, the provider will find out only at the next session. As you said, this could be a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later. So if we are able to stay, have this care continuity, we will be able to pick up signals and patterns that can raise a red flag to the providers
Right.
that can alert somebody, hey, let's bring this patient in a little earlier. Let's make sure that they have some sort of guided integration. So we would be able to catch a crisis in its early stages rather than when it's too late.
Right.
Patients, they have a hard time asking for help,
They
right?
do.
So they're not going to necessarily alert you in time. And so
Hmm.
some of these things are very important because you're giving the patient the capacity to like come in before and to empower them to be able to talk about things that they may not have noticed or before their crisis.
Right. Yeah, I agree 100% with you. Now, my last question, if
You
someone
don't really want to communicate, it's kind of like the symptoms make you even more distant.
Oh,
Becomes even
yeah, for sure. Through. I think a lot of people, especially when it comes to mental health and how it's affecting their physical health, even they want to feel better, but they do have a very hard time sharing it with the doctor. And I think a lot too is sometimes the fear of finding out the truth, and what it could be, and then they have to deal with it and face it, and then they have to overcome it and go through the steps of the process and of trying to heal the issue. And all those things combined, I think, play a big role on why, so many people are afraid to approach their doctor because, their life could change in a snap because then they have to go through certain processes and they have to do things differently. And then they know what's going on with them. And some people, as much as they want to be healed, they're afraid to know what is actually going on.
and also the shame and embarrassment of even talking to your doctor about
Yeah.
it can be very, very challenging.
Oh, I think so. I think fear and embarrassment and shame all are tied into it. I think those are definite, prominent emotions that are consistent when it comes to patients having to approach their doctor and tell them what's going
Uh,
on.
I've had a few patients come to me, when you go to your primary, I don't know if you know, but they have like a checklist of questions that they ask you. And
Yeah.
it's, um, this isn't to say that all doctors like this, but patients feel very judged, especially when questions come up for abuse, substances or alcohol or weight.
Hmm.
And I have a lot of patients coming to me, very, very difficult time talking about these things because they've been feeling so judged by it. And it's just kind of like a checklist and like, well, you need to do this. Why aren't you doing this? And it feels like all the blame is on them. And so what we're really trying to do is explain to them that this is a biological and metabolic problem and we're going to try and figure out how to approach it and take away some of the shame around it. And we've had a lot of success with that because what happens is when you have shame, the behaviors get worse.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Nikita, did you want to add to that?
No, I think that was, yeah, that was spot on. I think, most important thing is that we want our patients to feel seen, heard, and supported. And, one of the things that we really try to do is there are a lot of doctors that can use very difficult language to understand. And we want to make sure that our patient really understands the intention and the science behind every treatment. So,
Right.
whether it's something complex that's happening biologically or psychologically, we really break it down. And if a patient understands why a certain treatment is being prescribed or recommended, and you're presenting all of the information, here are the risks, here are the benefits, here's what we've observed clinically for people that have a very similar biological profile to yours,
Hmm.
giving the patient the opportunity to make an informed decision.
Right.
And most importantly, if they do decide to proceed with a certain treatment, they will feel like they're a part of the treatment. And that will really help with motivation and adherence, and probably subliminally with the actual result of the treatment as well.
I love that. Now, if someone is listening right now and they have been struggling and they have tried things, they have not gotten any better, and they're starting to wonder if anything will ever work, what do you want them to hear?
There's always a solution. There's many different paths to a solution. And I think the first thing to do is to try to figure out how to get help, who to communicate with, like tell somebody.
Hmm.
And also, if you feel safe with your clinician, have this conversation with them and see if they're not capable to be able to refer you to someone else.
You're not alone. There are people that can be there for you, that want to help you. So I think it's important to raise your hand and find the right resources that can support you for whatever you're going through. I think a lot of the times when a person is experiencing some serious mental health issues, they can feel alone and isolated, but it's important just to kind of speak up and make sure that you find the right provider that can help you.
I
And
love
there's
it.
ways of speaking up. So it's not just you can write an email to someone, you can send a text, you can go on forum to figure out like where you should go next. So, if you have difficult time just like speaking up, there are different ways and formats to do it.
I love that. Now, can you tell people a little about your services and what you have to offer?
You do that one.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, Fountain Health, we're really a medical clinic, first and foremost. Everything, the foundation of all of our work starts with biomarkers. And the biomarkers allow us to look at all of the systems within the body that we've been discussing today across metabolism, hormones, inflammation, cellular health, your sleep architecture. And from there, we use a range of different interventions. So we do traditional talk therapy, and we use peptides, GLP-1s, and ketamine therapy. I think the most important thing to mention is it's not about any specific molecule, but making sure that there is a system around that treatment. And so, what I mean by that is we're really looking at outcomes across time and making sure that everything is being tracked, measured, and adjusted in real time. So, when we're prescribing something, this is not just a kind of set it and forget it, but we're always making sure that we're looking at any changes that are happening in the biomarkers in a patient's behavior and making sure that we have the entire team to support them along the way. And it's not just mental health providers. We've got registered dietitian nutritionists, strength trainers, yogi and breathwork coaches. We will be bringing on an endocrinologist in the next couple of weeks. Our goal is to continue to build out the clinical depth that Fountain has.
I love that. Now, where can people find you?
Yeah, I mean, find us online at fountainnyc.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at fountainnyc. And yeah, if you Google us, you should be able to find us.
And also, for people who are not really sure, have a lot of questions, because obviously we do a lot of things that can be overwhelming to think about all the services and how does it even work? We do offer 15-minute complimentary consultations. If someone feels like this might be right for them, or they have some questions, or they want to see how it would integrate into what's happening with them, they can book one of those. Do you want to tell them how to do it?
Just give us a call. Our phone number is 917-886-7376. So one of our medical coordinators will pick up the phone and they can schedule it, or you can just set up a complimentary consultation through our website as well.
I love it. I love it. And for all the listeners out there, your mental health is not a character flaw. It is not a willpower problem, it's biology. And when you find a doctor who treats it that way, who looks at your whole system, your hormones, your inflammation, your biomarkers, your brain, everything that you can change. Dr. Doreen, I have to thank you so much for bringing this conversation to people who need it. And also, Nikita, thank you so much for sharing, your knowledge and your own experiences and being able to collaborate together to make this wonderful clinic so you could help so many people because there are so many people looking out there to find a way to feel better and they need somebody like yourselves who are able to guide them and help them in a more natural holistic way because there are so many things out there that can be really harmful to the body and to the mind and they're being used every day on a consistent basis So to be able to find a way that's more holistic, more naturopathic, more, a way that will really help people, and to be able to spend time with the person, really get to know them, and to be able to comfort them and hold their hand along the way. Because I think it's a scary time when you're going through these issues, when it comes to mental health and physical health, and you need somebody who's really cares. It means a lot when you have people next to you who are listening, and you can see that compassionate look in their eyes because they care. And those are the type of doctors and clinicians and people you want in your facility, because people, we lack that, unfortunately, in a lot of areas in our society. So I really thank both of you for being able to create a clinic that does all of this and has all these options for people to make people improve their lives mentally, physically, and even their spiritual well-being, because it's all connected as one, and they can live a healthy, happy, and a productive life using the facilities and the options that you give them at your facility. So I just want to thank you for being the people you are, and to take a step forward to help others and make their lives better as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for having us on. We really appreciate it. And just want to thank you for all the good work that you're doing around bringing more awareness to a lot of these important issues that people are facing.
Oh, thank you so much. And I feel the same way to you, to both of you. And thank you so much for being on the show. I hope we'll see you again. And thank you for your time.
Anytime. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.